Romans 12 and verse 15 says, "Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep." We are in the part of the book of Job where his friends have come to do just that, to weep with one who is weeping. And as we turn back to Job chapter 2 and 3, Satan's attack on Job is finished, his initial attack at least. He has taken all of Job's wealth, his children, and now his health. And Job is sitting and weeping in great pain with boils from the top of his head to the sole of his foot. And now he has answered his wife who just told him to curse God and die. And now his friends have come and they have sat with him in silence for 7 days. And as we look at these friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they are sincerely friends of Job. All right, they want what's best for Job. They want to be there for him. They care seemingly deeply for him. But the way they go about trying to comfort him is not effective and is simply not right. In Job chapter 3, Job begins to speak. This is his first part of the conversation with them. He speaks first, and he is cursing his day. Chapter 3, verse 1. The day in which he was born. And we noticed verses 1 through 5 last week, where he's speaking about this day that God would wipe it from the history books, that the day would never have existed. And so Job is not just wishing for death, he's wishing to have never lived, that he had died, had been miscarried, that none of this would have ever happened. And that has taken us through verse 5. All right, so verses 3 through 5, he speaks about the day and now that night. All right. Let darkness seize upon it. So, the moon and the stars do not shine, that this night, this day and night would have never been seen is the point. That never would have happened. Let that night, verse 7, be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. And so darkness and silence is what he wants the day that he was born in to be remembered by. Just oblivion. In verse 8, let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up. And in the King James Version, it says they're mourning. It's either English Standard Version or American Standard Version says Leviathan. Of course, we're going to talk about Leviathan later. But that's the thought here, and people don't really know what this verse means. Apparently there were these people, sort of diviners, who thought they had this ability to speak prophesy about the future and say that certain days were going to be bad days. It's thought that that's what it meant. Those that curse the day, let them curse that day, where something terrible has happened. And what happened on that day is Job was born. We see a man in a deep and really unreasonable depression. And what we see in grief and in mourning is that people are not always logical or reasonable during that time. Now, that's okay. It's a time of mourning. It's not the time to be reasonable and logical. And that's where Job is at this very moment, that he wished that none of this would have ever happened. And just a real sorrowful time and really a terrible thought that Job has. But that's what grief does to us. We're told that we ought not make big decisions in life during a time of grief, that there's a certain amount of time that needs to pass before we can make reasonable decisions, even about things that are not connected with what we're grieving over. Because grief does things to people in their mindset. And so that's where Job is right now. It says, let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. And the reason why he wants all this is verse 10. Because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Because he was born. Because he saw this world and all the sorrow that comes with it. He wished that he would never have been born. There in verse 12, prevent has more of the meaning of allow. And so he's basically, why was I not stillborn? Or why didn't I, be a miscarriage, the first question. Why died I not from the womb? And then, why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? So basically stillborn, died in birth. Why didn't I die shortly after that? In his Great Depression here, Job, again, wishes he would have never been born. And he continues on with this thought. If it would have happened that he died in the womb or was stillborn, then he could have been at rest. He wouldn't have had to deal with all the turmoil and suffering that this life brings, especially the great amount of suffering that he in particular is going through. He would have been with those kings and counselors of the earth which built desolate places for themselves, most likely talking about the big fancy graves that they built for them. You look at the pyramids in Egypt and how those are, grave sites for pharaohs. And they weren't the only culture who did that. These great men of the earth who have built these monuments and little buildings that they would sleep in forever, and their eyes, and he would have been at rest like they are, or with the princes that had gold, or as the ones who were miscarried, verse 16, as infants which never saw the light. So once again, Job wishing not death now, but that he never lived in this earth, in this world. All right, so describing in his mind the place of this rest. The wicked cease from troubling. So those Chaldeans and Sabeans who came and killed his servants and took his animals, in this place of rest, there is none of that. The wicked don't come and do any harm. Those who are tired receive rest. The prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. So here are people who have imprisoned because of oppression, not because of wrongdoing. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. Verse 19, the small and great are there. The servant is free from his master. So this place of rest where the burdens of life no longer affect him. That's what Job looks forward to. And it's what we look forward to as well. He doesn't specifically talk about heaven here or paradise, but that's the idea of it, that there would be this peace and the rest that comes if he had never been born, if he had died so early. Light, often in these poetic books, and especially Job, stands for life, the light of life. Why is it given to those who are in misery and deep depression? Why is life given to those who are embittered by suffering, who don't want to live any longer? And Job didn't. Job didn't want to live any longer. He wasn't going to do anything about that. He's not suicidal, but he's ready for this life to end. He longed for death. Why is light and life given to those who long for death, but death doesn't come? that they dig. Look at this. They dig for death more than for hid treasures. That's how much Job longed for his suffering to be over. That would dig for death like treasure hunters, more so than treasure hunters. Why is life and light given to those who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave, when they finally find the death that they're digging for? They rejoice. Why? So he's saying, why is God continuing to let me live when, and more broad of that than all those that are so depressed and just want it to be over, who in Job's mind, it'd be an act of mercy on God's part to just go ahead and let him die. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid? Notice this language, whom God hath hedged in. Now, you remember what Satan's accusation about Job is, that God had put a hedge around Job by all of his riches. Job here is reversing that. That basically God is painting Job into a corner by all this suffering. That he's not free to go about. That he has this wall built around him because of all this suffering. Why does he continue to live? Is his question. God's never going to answer that question, by the way. All these questions that Job asked of God throughout the book, God never, through a spoken revelation, answers them. But still, Job comes to understand through the actions of God at the end of the book. His sighing and his roarings, they come before he eats, they are poured out like the waters. Job is in great pain, so there's a lot of moaning and grunting and difficulty. You just think about how difficult it would be for him to move with boils covering his body. When he sat down, and certain part of your skin contracts and other parts stretch, and then you have to sit on those boils, and you lean back on something. There's boils all over your back. You pick up food to eat it, and there's boils on your face and on your hands, and every move that Job made would have been excruciatingly painful. And so he talks here about his sighings and his roarings. He says the thing that he greatly feared. So there's physical damage here, but there's also psychological damage, mental damage here. The thing that he greatly feared has come upon him. Loss of everything, the great pain that he is feeling, and also this, questioning his mind about his relationship with God. Why is God doing this to him? And so there's a lot of emotional damage that goes along with this. And so he reasons in verse 26, I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet when trouble came. So Satan's view of Job was that everything was great with Job. Life was great. He was hedged in. He had all this great wealth. He had his family. He had his health. And so he was carefree. And Job here says that wasn't the case. He was dealing with the things that were common to man to deal with in life. And so it's not that he was hedged in then and that he didn't have to deal with the difficulties of life and didn't have to face temptation and all these other things. He said, I wasn't at rest. I wasn't in safety. I had to deal with, Chaldeans who had come and try to take his stuff and fight them off. And, I had to deal with all this type of stuff. And yet this amount of trouble still came on him. And Job is confused by it. Leading into next week, we have chapters 4 and 5, where Eliphaz speaks up. So Job's had his initial turn, and you can tell by how Eliphaz begins that he was just waiting for his opportunity to speak. And he has some things to say. And again, what he says is classified at the end of the book as not right. That he has not spoken what was right about God like Job has. He's going to make some accusations about Job out of ignorance. None of these men can list Job's sins. They're going to eventually give him a list of, well, maybe you've done this or maybe you've done that. But their whole premise is that all of this suffering that Job is going through is the chastening of the Lord, is that God is punishing Job specifically for his sins. And they're gonna use all sorts of tactics to try to get Job to repent of whatever secret evil it is that he's done that's caused this. Right. He is not at all suicidal. He's not going to take his life. That's basically, in a way, what Job's wife was telling him to do. Sort of, today there's death by cop. That would be death by God. Curse God, and he's going to kill you, and it'll all be over. And he refused to do that. Shall I receive good at the hand of the Lord and not evil? And so that's very right. He's not at all suicidal. He's not promoting that or condoning it. So suicide is common among people who have severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia and things like that, bipolar and others. Those who are especially severe in their bipolar, there's different levels. And they are left in the hands of a just and merciful God. And I don't think those are questions that we can answer about the accountability level of those who are so severely mentally ill. There are levels to that. It's not to say that they're not accountable to anything that they do, but when you have lost take schizophrenic people in particular who are unmedicated and all that. I mean, how difficult would it be to live life not knowing what's real and what's not? And you have these people that you think are real, or these voices in your head that you think are real, telling you to kill yourself all the time. The argument can be made that anybody who takes their own life, their mind is not right, but it's a matter of whether or not they're accountable at that time or not. And that's that's something we have to leave up in God's hands. Yeah, and that's not the meaning of curse. In fact, I don't really know how in our language that's what curse came to mean, because biblically it's not at all. Like people try to say that Peter started using foul language when he cursed when he was denying Jesus, but that's not what curse basically means. To speak out against, speak negatively against something, and so he's cursing his day, the day that he was born. So no, he's not using foul language or anything like that when he curses. No, and so one thing, and we're going to talk about this verse a little later, but this is a good spot to talk about as well. In Job 42, in verse 7, this verse gives us a little insight into this conversation that's going on between Job and his friends. Job 42 in verse 7 says, "And it was so that after the Lord had spoken these words unto Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, My wrath is kindled against thee, and against thy two friends. For ye have not spoken of me the thing that is right, as my servant Job hath." All right, so we take this whole conversation, and God looked at all four men. Now, there's another man here that hasn't been talked about yet, and we will later on. But the three friends and Job, God looked at this whole conversation and said, Job has spoken what was right, and the three men spoke what was wrong. And so Job is not sinning in what he is saying. And this is just an expression of the deep depression that he's in. Talking honestly about how he feels. There's no sin in wishing that he had never been born. There's no sin in that. Now, that mindset could turn into sin. We could use that to have a bittered view of life. But that's not what Job's doing right now. He's in the midst of his suffering and the deepest, darkest grief of it. And it's just expressing his feelings about it. And there's nothing negative that he says about God. In fact, throughout all of this, there's not. There's questioning. He questions God. He wonders why God is doing this, because according to his understanding that God is the one doing it. And he is not condemned whatsoever for it. The friends are going to come along and say that Job is obviously a great sinner and God is punishing him, and that infuriates God because that's not the truth. But that's the overriding difference between Job's place in this, who thinks that God has done this to him, but he's questioning why and trying to figure out how all of this fits into the characteristics of God that don't change. And his friends are going to come along and speak against who God is by what they say.